Well, it's time to start, but I see we only have 4 people, and I guess that's 3 students. So it's just Pan, Kari, and Linda.
Hey man, how's it going?
What was that?
I said, hey man, how's it going?
How's it going? I know it's really more like a chat rather than a class. So I mean, I must wonder if
There's a midterm on Friday.
I see. Okay. Well, thank you guys for showing up. That's very kind of you. I know you're all busy. So I mean, I guess we can still do a Kahoot. It's only going to be the 3 of you. Should we do that? I mean, I guess it doesn't really necessarily change exactly what we're going to do here. We can, yeah, I guess it doesn't really change anything at all. So let's just, should we just go ahead and do the Kahoot? What do you think?
Sure. Sounds
all
like
right.
a fun thing.
Okay. All right. I was just agonizing about one of the questions before I got on today.
Could it be that one video is missing from the YouTube slides?
Yeah, so I should have, well, I guess I'll mention it now, but yesterday I went through and watched my entire lecture again, just to remind myself about what I said. And I realized that one of the videos, it's actually, so it wasn't there in the playlist, but actually it does exist on my channel. So I actually now have put it into the playlist. So if you go back and look again, it's there now. But yeah, but my apologies.
The equilibrium relationship between consumption, leisure, and investment.
Exactly. So if you just played through, you wouldn't have actually seen that video. And unfortunately, that was kind of it was sort of a critical one because that's where a lot of the calculations are done. And, one of the more complicated ones, I thought, actually. So if you like,
I didn't watch it. So.
Okay. So, I mean, if you like, we can maybe go through that one a little bit, the calculations there. But anyway. Oh, I think I shared my screen without the sound, so let me just stop sharing and reshare here. Oh, I just did it again. Sorry. Hold on here. Share screen, share computer sound. Okay. All right, let's do it. Which class do you guys have the midterm in, out of curiosity? You say something, Linda? I couldn't hear you.
Did you ask which topic we have the midterm or?
Yes. What is it?
It's financial econometrics. Yeah.
Okay. Who's teaching that this year?
Lisbeth Lacour.
Oh, okay. Lisbeth? Yeah, I know. I mean, she's my colleague in my department.
Yeah. I haven't actually had time to watch the videos yet, so I feel a bit bad joining the Kahoot, but I will try.
Yeah, it's yeah. Well, give it a try if you want. Otherwise, it's just 2 of them. All right.
You're going down, just so you know. I have a championship to defend.
Oh, I'm sorry, what was that?
I'm just making a joke.
Oh, okay. You have a championship to defend. I see. Okay. Awesome, Linda. Thank you. But I'll take into account that you have them. These are pretty technical as well. So let's go. 30 seconds for each one. And no worries, of course. Don't worry about it. Okay, so what makes the real business cycle real? Describes real events, not just theory. It's the real model used by central banks. Money is irrelevant, or money is a critical part of the model. Yeah, exactly. So so if you think about kind of like macro 101, I think I might have mentioned that earlier. I just taught that for the first time actually this semester. It was like a short course at the beginning of the semester. And I was surprised at how much it's about sort of the central bank and the government sort of making decisions about, how much money to print or what the interest rate should be, or, what the government spending should be in order to sort of stimulate the economy. So if you look at this model in the book, kind of the thing that's very, that was sort of, I don't want to say revolutionary, but like, when they developed this model in the 1980s, the thing that was absent in the model was actually money, right? So, I mean, there's no real role in this model for any sort of central bank to print anything. There's just no money in the model at all. As you might have seen, again, I don't say too much about it. It is in the lecture, but the government doesn't really do anything useful. The government in this model is just a source of sort of variation. So it's a model where there's no money, there's no monetary policy. Yeah. Okay, and that's going to be different, by the way, moving forward, right? So we're going to be looking at other models next, where there is going to be a role for money, like in maybe a sticky price model or this Lucas model of asymmetric information we're going to cover next. And then certainly modern DSGs, modern dynamic stochastic general equilibrium models that are used by central banks, those also have this characteristic that there's money involved. Okay, so yeah, there's no money in this one, it's real. Okay, which of the following RBC elements differs from the Ramsey growth model? Is it that there's uncertainty about the future, technology, individuals decide lifetime income, decide lifetime consumption, interest rates adjust, or technology evolves exogenously? Right. So the thing that makes this this model different than the other models. So one thing we talked about with like the Ramsey growth model is it's a dynamic general equilibrium model. So this one adds the stochastic. So people don't really know what exactly is going to happen in the future. They only know, they can make plans conditional on what happens, but they don't know what's going to happen. So you think it's kind of natural for a business cycle, right? Does any of us really know what the economy is going to be doing in 2 years? Is it going to be a boom? Is it going to be a bust? We don't know, right? So there's uncertainty. What is the immediate effect of a positive technology shock on capital stocks? Do they jump up? Do they jump down? Or is there no change? No immediate change. Right. So this is kind of a tricky question, obviously, but the point is that the capital stock is a stock, right? So there's no nothing that happens can have any sort of immediate change, and here by immediate I mean like the moment of the change. There can't be any sort of discontinuity in the capital stock, and the reason why is because the only thing that can change is flows, right? People can save more, they can dissave. But investment can change, but the stock is the stock. It's like the amount of buildings and roads that are in the economy. So the government announces a policy, or there's some change in there's an unexpected technology shock. It doesn't change the number of buildings and roads and machines that we have today. It might change our investment, but it can't change the stock, right? So yeah. What is the immediate effect of a positive technology shock on wages? Yeah, exactly. So, the stock of technology can't change, right? But the wages can immediately adjust. So when there's a positive technology shock, what happens is that basically the economy is more productive than it used to be, which you can think of that as like sort of a shift in the production function up. And as we saw sort of in a Ramsey growth type model, just to use the intuition from there, that's going to kind of lead to an increase in the capital stock. So if, if we want to sort of produce more, and since we can't use more capital to produce more, we have to use more labor to produce more. And the only way we can get more labor into the economy is to raise the wage to incentivize people to have less leisure and use their time more for work. So that's kind of the logic, I guess, on why this happens. I will say, so, I think that's a good a good argument for why wages jump up. I see somebody said that wages go down. And when I went through this Kahoot, for some reason, I had actually marked both wages jump up and wages jump down as correct. So I think that was a mistake from last time, but maybe there's some argument that I'm forgetting about why wages could also jump down, but I don't think so. I think they have to go up. So anyway. In the RBC model, population N and labor supply L are different. Why are they the same in the Ramsey model? So in the RBC, we talk about population and we talk about the labor supply. They're not the same number. When we were talking about the Ramsey growth model, it was just one number. The number of hours were the same as the number of workers. So is it the production function Ramsey is different, utility function in Ramsey is different, Ramsey model assumes that wages are constant, or capital is not owned by the household in Ramsey? Yeah, so the utility function is different. In the Ramsey growth model, we had assumed that the utility function was just based on consumption. But in the RBC model, we assumed that it's based on consumption, but then also leisure. So the more consumption you have, the better off you are, and the more leisure you have, the better off you are. Yeah, that's what's causing the difference. But then, and if you have leisure as part of the consumption function, that's a choice now. So the hours that are worked is going to be an endogenous thing that's different from the population. Why is that important? I think I don't have that as a question, so I can just say it. The reason it's important is because we want to study how labor supply or unemployment changes over the business cycle. So if we have the workforce being the same as the number of hours in the economy, there's no way for us to sort of study the way that the business cycle affects labor supply because it's exogenous. So that's why we put it in here. When we were talking about the growth model, we didn't really care so much about, how unemployment changes across the growth path of the economy. In fact, I don't think it would have changed at all. But I'm not 100% sure about it. No, maybe it would actually. I don't know. It's a question to think about. But anyway, we weren't focused on that question, so that's why we didn't put it into the utility function. I'm thinking that if the wage rate should have changed, right? Because the marginal productivity of capital is changing on the transition to the steady state. So I think that actually you would actually get different amount of labor supply along the path to the steady state, which is kind of interesting. But anyway, yeah. Let's answer that one. In short, there's the last question. After a positive technology shock, why does labor supply drop below steady state after a while? So, first labor supply jumps up, but then after a while it goes down below the steady state level and then eventually kind of comes back. Is it because we want to balance out the immediate jump in labor supply? Is it because capital's rental rate rises? Or is it because if we're above the steady state of capital, wealth implies more leisure in the transition or on the transition? Yeah, so this was one I was kind of agonizing about the right way to write this answer, but that's right. So what happens is, imagine the way this is going to happen. The economy is shocked by this positive technology shock. It's suddenly more productive. Okay, so we want to sort of raise the capital stock to take advantage of that productivity. But then what's happening is, over time, that positive productivity shock, it's sort of fading away. Okay, so eventually we're kind of getting closer to our original steady state level of productivity, but now we have too much capital stock. Okay, so what do we need to do? Well, we need to kind of produce a little bit less. Our consumption is going to be smooth. We're going to produce a little bit less so that in a sense we're dissaving. Well, we have a lot of capital stock. how are we going to produce less? You know, of course, we're going to use all of the capital we have. We're going to produce less by having less hours worked. So, you know, that's sort of from a macroeconomic perspective of what's happening. But then if we jump down to the microeconomic perspective, then it's, as you guys answered, that you know, the people are wealthy, so they're going to sort of have more leisure, rather they're going to live more off of their rental income rather than their labor income.
So the income effect is stronger than the substitute effect.
The income effect is stronger than the substitution effect. But, you know, I'm hesitant to say that that's true because we assumed log utility, which make those two things balance off.
Okay.
But I think that actually in the previous version of the slides, I might have had something about that. That's not slides, the Kahoot. Yeah, we should. It can't be that the income effect is dominating the substitution effect for the reason I said, which is we've assumed log utility. I think it's rather just, it's all in the equilibrium. You know, you have to compare wages. Of course, it depends on the wages and the rates of return. So the wage drops. Let's come back to this one in just a second because we'll look at those transition paths when I get to the slides. Okay. So Linda with third place without having time to watch the video beforehand. Hari defends his title. It's easier when there's only 3 people.
I'll put this in my CV.
Exactly. And yeah. So anyway, okay, great. So let's stop this, close it. And then let's move here. Okay, so this is the just the slides I have for the real business cycle model, and it was a long one. So I can see how, so thank you to those that watched it, and I can understand how you might, if you had a midterm coming up, you might have not had time to watch it before the Q&A session today. But anyway, so if we look at kind of what happens here, let's just kind of re-examine these slides for what happens when we have a positive shock to technology. So again, we have this shock, it jumps up, and then over time that sort of positive technology shock is going to fade away back to 0, which is normalized to be the steady state level of technology. So 0 here doesn't mean 0, it means the steady state level, and 1 here means 1 percentage point increase. But anyway, yeah, so that's going on. And then what happens to capital is kind of what we talked about a minute ago. It can't change immediately. So it starts at 0, and then it rises. But then eventually, you know, the technology is dropping back towards its steady state level. So of course, the capital stock will also eventually go back to the steady state level somewhere out here past the 40th period. And then what I mentioned about labor supply. So note here that the labor supply actually jumps, right? So the capital stock can't jump because that's stock, but the labor supply can, because labor in a sense is a flow, right? So the labor supply does jump up here, and then it's going to fall as the capital stock grows. And you can see that eventually it actually falls below 0, which means that the labor supply is lower than its steady state level. And then eventually it's going to kind of come back up again after a long time. So if we think about and then let's look at wages too. I think it's the next one. Well, it's the one after this. So consumption, what happens? Well, this is an interesting one. Of course, you know, we had a positive productivity shock. We expect that consumption is going to go up. This was like a good shock for the economy. It's like the, you know, the boom part of the business cycle. So we do see that consumption goes up, but, you know, it doesn't go up as far as it's going to go eventually, immediately. And why is that? It's because we're building up that capital stock. Okay, right now, the rate of return on capital, you're going to see it's going to be really high at the beginning, because the economy really, really wants more capital. It's got this positive productivity shock, this TFP shock. So consumption goes up, and then as the technology shock kind of goes away, then consumption goes away as well. Output, you can see it jumps up, you know, productivity jumped up 1%, production jumps up almost as high, Why not totally as high? It's because there's a distortion between capital and labor. We'd ideally have more capital too, but we can't immediately get more capital. So production is going to jump up a lot, but it's going to fall. And you can see that actually it falls faster than consumption. Well, that makes sense, right? Because here the consumption, people are sort of consuming this capital stock in a sense, as they go back to the steady state level of capital. They build it up and then they consume it for a long time. Also, there's this motivation that these consumers have to smooth their consumption. You don't want to have your consumption jumping up and down a lot. You want to try to have sort of somewhat steady consumption over time. So that explains, again, it's another reason why the consumption doesn't vary as much as the output. Right. Last one here is wages and the interest rate. So again, we see this interest rate jump up. That's going to induce people to save, right? But we want to make sure that people are also going to be working, right? So the labor supply jumped up. How do we get them to do that? How do we get people to actually work more? The wage is going to have to jump up a lot here too. And then over this period, it's falling. Okay, so as the wage falls, then people are more likely to sort of take leisure instead of working. And yeah, I think that's as good as I can do. There's lots of things at play in this model. The prices are endogenous, the people's choices of labor supply is endogenous, savings is endogenous. So, it's hard to sort of think about just one thing happening in the model. But if we want to think about why this labor supply is dropping here below the steady state level, I think it's easy to think about it from sort of the macroeconomic perspective. We've got a ton of capital. We want to sort of get rid of our capital stock, which means we want to dissave. So how are we going to produce less than, how are we going to produce less? Well, we're going to do it by not supplying so much labor. But that's sort of the macroeconomic perspective. From the household's perspective, they're just choosing, they're looking at their wages that they can get, they're looking at, the utility of leisure, and they're saying that it makes more sense to have more leisure at those wages. So that's that.
So what I dislike about these pictures is that you kind of grab these numbers just out of your hat. Like why does labor only go up 0.38?
Yeah, you're right. So I mean, I think I actually even just took these out of the textbook, but
Yeah.
But they ultimately come out of these things. So I went over these very quickly in the video, but basically the way that you solve these models is that you assume that I can write out consumption at time t as a linear function of capital at time t, the productivity level at time t, and government expenditures at time t. Okay, so these two things are basically exogenous and they kind of move around. This one here is endogenous, it depends on saving, okay? And then you assume also that labor supply is also again, a linear function of these guys, okay? And it's called log linearization because actually I've been saying these guys, but these are all in logs, okay? So it's the logs of these things. Okay, so that's fine, but then we have to say, how does this capital evolve over time? And then you do the same thing, but now you have capital at time t+1 is equal to capital at time t, and then the technology shock and the government shock, and we assume again this linear form, okay? So once we've done that, it turns out that through using sort of the model, simply using the model, you can go through and solve for these parameters, BKK, BKA, and BKG, and then also the parameters here. And then once you have those parameters, then this becomes something that you can actually do, right? I mean, you can actually simulate this model then. So I start out with a K0, and I want to find out, so maybe actually the easiest thing to do is to start, with this one. So I start with a K0, okay? And then I assume a path here. So in the experiments we did in the slides, we would assume that this A would sort of jump up at time 1 and then sort of slowly return to its steady state level. And then we make a similar, we just assume that GT is constant. Okay, so it's just sitting at 0. Okay, so I kind of feed in these processes. and then I feed in a K0, and then I see what happens to KT plus 1. So I feed in K0, I figure out what happens to K1. Then I feed in, GT1, AT1. These are things that the god of the economy, I'm feeding in. They're like stochastic shocks that I can decide for my purposes of my simulation. So I feed in A1 and G1, and then I also feed in the K1 that I got from the last calculation. Okay, that gives me K2. And then again, I feed in G2, A2, K2, and I get K3. So I'm going to get a path of K for as many periods as I want. Once I've done that, I go back to the last slide. Now I've got a path of K. I've got a path of the A's because, again, I'm sort of the god of the economy and I get to feed in the shocks. I've got the G's. These are exogenous. I'm a god of the economy. I feed in those shocks. And I can just get all of the C's and the L's forever, okay? So then once I've got the K's forever, I've got the C's as long as I want, I've got the L's as long as I want, then in order to figure out the other things in those pictures, like the interest rate, the wage rate, those things are all functions of parameters and the labor supply and the capital. And so, I mean, it's like, once I've got those, I've got everything. So, I mean, as long as you allow me to sort of give you these parameters, then you yourself in like Excel can basically create figures like this. And in fact, I think that one of the years in the class, I actually, it's a little bit different when it's online, but I actually had the students program up like a simulation of the RBC model just in an Excel spreadsheet. And, given the parameters, it's actually not that hard to do that. So, I mean, that's kind of a long answer to where did these pictures come from? They're in a sense just made up, but they're made up and sort of disciplined by the structure of the model. So like this blue line technology, this is something exogenous. This is something that I, the experimenter, decide. Basically a shock in one period and then it kind of dies away over time. But then capital is an endogenous decision and labor is an endogenous decision that comes out of the structure of the model. So yeah. Okay. So there's that. You can do something similar with government shock, but we don't have to go over this, right? I mean, it's from the video. You can hear me talk about it there. So any questions? I mean, there's only 3 of you. I guess, Linda, you didn't watch it yet, which is fine. Karipan, any questions? So you have to realize that maybe it'd be fun to just kind of talk about why this model is important and where it came from. So so you have to imagine that in the late 1970s and the early 1980s, at the time macroeconomics was sort of dominated by these Keynesian models, the like sort of ISLM type models that you probably studied in your undergraduate. And in those models, they are a little bit. One thing about those models is that they sort of assume that people expect inflation to be anchored, right? I think that's what they call it these days. People kind of have a guess about what inflation is going to be tomorrow, and they guess that it's going to be whatever the central bank told them it was going to be. And it turns out that if they don't have that anchoring, then all these things, the Phillips curve, et cetera, they just kind of go out the window. And then so in the middle of the 1970s, a group of economists associated with the University of Chicago said, it's ridiculous for us as economists to think that we understand the economy sort of so much better than people that are actually, making decisions that, have like real consequences for their lives. Should you take out, a loan? Should you, how much labor should you supply? How much savings how much should you save today? How much should you put in your pension? So, we here, the academic economists, we're making it look like these people are making decisions that are just totally bad for themselves. And it feels weird to sort of to assume that we sort of are these sort of wizards that understand everything and the little people don't understand anything. So if you have in your model these sort of people that are making really bad decisions for themselves all the time, then maybe that's not such a great model. So they came up with this this sort of rational expectations model of a business cycle. And the thing that's interesting about it is it doesn't depend on any sort of weird, um, sort of coordination failures where people all believe something that's wrong and then suddenly it turns out to be a different way than they expected. These sort of Keynesian beauty contest type things. There's no money illusion. Think about it in like a Keynesian model. It's like people get income in their bank account and they're suddenly like, they're like, I'm richer, right? So then they go and they spend it. This old perspective, especially of the Chicago economists, was, wait a second, if you just print money and give it to people, you're not actually creating more goods. So, I mean, why would they be fooled into thinking that they're richer if everybody is getting more money? It's this old quantity theory of money, that the more money there is, the higher our prices. So, printing dollars or printing kroner or printing euros doesn't do anything. In fact, you can get a whole business cycle without making any funny assumptions about money or tricking people into thinking that they're richer than they actually are or things like that. So that was kind of where this all came out of. And I think it was shocking at the time because, here we have a business cycle and it's based on only sort of real things. There's none of this coordination failures or the banking system goes bust or anything like that. It's just simply there's shocks to technology that are persistent and people are reacting to them as best they can. And in particular, the best thing the government can do is just butt out. So I think it made a real splash when it came in. And then later it was sort of revised because I think people believed that money did have an effect. So they wanted to figure out how they could put money into a model like this, which is what we'll be talking about in the future. But yeah, that's my little spiel about why this was sort of an important model in the history of macroeconomics over the last, say, 30, 40 years. Yeah, this is all. Maybe I can say something about the little part of the slides that missed.
Maybe because you're going from it, you talked about inventory and how that changed.
Yeah, I got to look. I confused myself, and then
it made no sense.
It doesn't make any sense, but I mean, that's more like a fact that is kind of hard to explain. So again, here, if you look at what happens over the course of the business cycle, we're looking here in this column. This is like the share in the fall of GDP in recessions relative to normal growth. So it's kind of like what percentage do these things fall? Okay. So so a lot of these are not surprising. So just to sort of recap, in consumption, we expect that durable consumption falls more than non-durables, because non-durables are things like food. It's like I'm going out and I'm buying food. There's a recession, I'm still buying food. I have to feed myself. Okay, so non-durables don't fall as much as durables. Durables are things like household appliances, putting a new roof on my house or buying a car or whatever. So, if there's a recession, I can still run my old car a little bit longer. I could put off putting a new roof on my house a little longer. I could maybe, wait for a little bit before I buy a new appliance. So it makes sense that we would expect that durable consumption falls more than non-durables. So this one totally makes sense. Now, inventories. So it turns out that during a recession, inventories tend to fall a lot. Okay. And I confused myself in the video because I was trying to puzzle through it. And then I did a little bit of research online. Actually, when I made that video, I paused it and I went online, read a little bit. So it's true that this is sort of a little bit counterintuitive. So what I might have thought happens, I mean, there's a lot going on here, but what I might have thought happened to inventories, which is not correct, is that, you know, people are not buying during a particular period because there's a recession. So then the stores are building up inventories. So then I would have thought that inventories would actually rise during a recession. But it turns out here that inventories are falling. Okay? So it's a bit of a puzzle. And I think you can construct some stories. But Pan, I see you've unmuted. Is that a mistake?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, so in this model, are we looking at the output growth while we are isolating the effect of money or interest rate?
Yeah, well, I mean, in this model, there is an interest rate, right? There's a rate of return in this model. So, you know, that's still there. It's just, it's a real interest rate. So it's kind of like,
Okay.
you know, how many apples do I get if I lend the tractor to the apple farmer, right? So, yeah, there's no money. You print money, it doesn't do anything here. All the prices are in terms of real things. So there's a price of consumption today, a price of consumption tomorrow. You can trade off consumption today for consumption tomorrow. That's a well-defined price, but there's no money.
Okay. Because I mean, as we have said, I mean, printing more money makes the people more wealthy, and they may demand more outputs, right? That's what we think.
In macro 101,
Yeah,
it's certainly there, right? You have your where's my pen? In macro 101, you're going to have your where can I write it? What up here? You have your, let's see here. Hold on a second. Got your y is equal to c, which is a function of y, plus I, which often you take as kind of given. It depends on which macro model you're looking at, plus, let's say, g plus nx.
yeah.
Okay, so then the way this multiplier usually works is you think the government wants to prime the pump. They increase their demand, which creates more output, but then output is also income. So then these guys get more income and they consume part of it, right? That's like the way that typically the story works. But if you think about it, it's a little bit weird. So the first thing that's weird about it, and this is what I used to say before I taught Macro 101, and now I've sort of become a little bit more, I've become a little bit, maybe a little bit more, I believe a little bit more what they teach in Macro 101, but what is y? Y is equal to f of k, let's say L. Okay, so, you know, in our country, we have a certain amount of capital. In our country, we have a certain amount of labor, okay? We have a certain amount of factors. So in a sense, this y is sort of fixed in the short run by the amount of factors we have in our country, okay? So it's like if the government suddenly wants to buy more stuff, they can't magically give us more machines and more workers. It's like that stuff's already there. You can't create more of it just because you demand more. You know, the analog with Mike, I love talking about cake, right? So, you know, suppose that I make a cake for my family and, you know, everybody has one piece and there's none left. And then my son wants more cake. Well, you know, more cake doesn't just magically appear. You know what I mean? It's like there was a cake. That's all there was. So this cake here is kind of fixed, right? I mean, the government demanding more it's not clear exactly how it's going to create more cake. So that was kind of what I used to always say about this equation. And I think that you can maybe say a little bit more to make it sound more realistic. So for instance, maybe I say that this L here isn't fixed. Maybe there's unemployment, right? So then maybe some people aren't working. So then if the government demands more, then those people that aren't working are going to start working or something. But, you know, this idea that demand drives supply rather than supply drives demand, it's a little bit counterintuitive to me. And in fact, it was counterintuitive before Keynes, right? So Keynes's big contribution was to think about economics this way. But yeah, so that's that. Yeah, in this model, you can't fool people. In this model up here, you're kind of fooling them in a sense. They get more nominal money in their pocket, and then they think they're richer, so then they start spending more. This model is kind of in this tradition, right? The fixed cake tradition. You give people more money, and just the prices of everything go up. So then nothing changes.
Yeah, but I mean, that's also what the America is doing right now, isn't it?
Yeah, right now it's a little
printing more money and
yeah,
boosting the government expenditure.
That's right. So I mean, there's always the "this time is different" thing, but this time is different. Okay, so this recession is different because there's a lockdown, right? So I mean, it's not exactly that the economy is in like a typical recession. It's in a recession because there's like a regulation that says people can't work.
To force them to stop the productions, right?
Exactly. So so really, I think the way to think about, I think the way to think about the spending by the American government as a first pass is that it's a transfer. Okay, so the idea is you give you give everybody money, and then let's be conservative economists at the moment and say that's going to cause inflation in the future. So who's kind of paying for that? It's the people who are holding on to, people who have debtors, whatever, somebody's gonna be paying for it in the future. But in the meantime, it's like people that have lost their jobs and they are really having a difficult situation because of the coronavirus. They're now sort of getting a transfer. So the pie is fixed in my sort of formulation here. This pie is fixed, but by giving everybody some amount of money, it's in a way sort of a transfer from the richer people to the poorer people, or the people that have it better under the corona crisis to those that have it worse. So even though the pie is fixed, the transfer, giving everybody money actually is sort of a transfer, changes the cut.
Okay.
But yeah, and then just to come back, just to say one last thing about inventories. Yeah, so the inventories are somewhat of a puzzle. I mean, I think that you could maybe say something like there's a negative economic shock. So suddenly, businesses aren't as productive as they used to be. So suddenly they have to meet their demand, they have to be supplying more inventory or something. But yeah, you're right. It is somewhat of a puzzle, and it's actually a puzzle in the macroeconomics literature. And there's some research on it, but none of it had like a super clear story, I thought. So if you're interested, I can point you in the direction of some sources, but yeah. Okay. Let's do another 5 minutes for any other questions we have, and then I'll give you a break, and then we'll talk about the problem set. Let's see here. I can't actually remember. I think it was around here that you probably missed the video, but I show a lot of steps, so maybe it's actually just enough to look at the way it works.
Yeah, it's the first order conditions with respect to kt+1 is missing. Okay. And you begin at the Euler equation, but you're kind of coming back to it, adding on the old video.
Right.
The one that I missed at least.
So it's here. So you kind of missed this discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess the only thing I really want to say about this, I mean, I guess you can go back and watch the video if you want, but this is a much easier way to solve these type of problems. So, one way to solve these problems would be to use like the Lagrangian multipliers methods. But I find it's actually much easier to substitute. So that's what I'm doing here. So I take the budget constraint, and then I just substitute away this CT. And then my maximization problem, which used to have 3 things in it, now only has 2 things in it. And there's no budget constraint. So this is just totally unconstrained. And it works because you can see that, if we're specific here, this little k, it's got a t subscript. So suppose this is 2, okay? So if we take the derivative of this object with respect to k2, then you can see that that's going to appear twice. It's once going to appear in as kt, and then it's once going to appear as kt plus 1, right? At time 1, kt plus 1 is 2, right? So then you're going to take one derivative with respect to this guy and one derivative with respect to that guy. That's the idea. But I think otherwise it's fairly straightforward. So yeah. Also gives you the standard Euler equation that when you've been doing this for a while, you notice that you always end up with an Euler equation that looks like this. But yeah. Okay. Well, any other questions about? I mean, it is a pretty involved mathematically chapter, so I understand that. I think I said in the video, and I'll say it again now. You don't have to know the details of this log linearization. Maybe just knowing what it is, in the sense that, like I kind of discussed earlier. So you're going to kind of just assume that you can write equations like this in log linear terms, and then you have to go through and use the structure of the model to solve for these parameters. And then that's kind of all you have to know, I think. And then once you have these, again, using this equation, I can solve for the entire path of capital as long as I want. And then once I got the entire path of capital, then I can solve for the entire path of consumption and labor. And that's everything endogenous in the model. So yeah. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break, or maybe let's take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll solve 2.17 in problem set 2, which is a problem that I kind of like because it's one of those problems that has it's not just solving a model for no reason, it's actually got kind of a point to it. So we'll come back and do that.
David. I'll wait for you to eat.
I'm out. What's up?
These videos are so funny. I have it in the back of my mind that you're always talking to like the last year's class and saying like we talked about in class, and I'm like, well, you didn't talk about that with me.
No, that's probably right. Well, you know, I only recorded 2 or 3 of them, I think.
And also, you're like going through the beginning of COVID at that time in the beginning of last video. It's funny to relive it with you.
And you can see my son is running around in the background because his school was closed.
Yeah, one time he like ran past you, and it probably like disturbed you more that he was trying to run fast and not be in the camera for a long time than just going slowly.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he didn't care about that. He didn't want to be on the camera, I'm sure. But yeah.
And we're getting to know you and your family, and we're just here on the computer watching this on YouTube.
Yeah, it's weird. It's definitely weird. In the future, I'm wondering what we're going to do next year, right? I mean, so suppose we're back in class physically. Now I have this bank of videos, and you're right, there's maybe one I could re-record, but you know, in past years I would just lecture, right? So I mean, I would do what I'm doing basically, but then lecture, and then it would be a little bit different, right? Because then I'd have, you know, I'd stop and ask a question and we talk about something, and that was probably better than just videos. But now that I have the videos, there's a question about what I should do moving forward with this course. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, we had a really good course last semester that Katharina taught in asset pricing.
Mm-hmm.
And she had videos, and there was only classes every other week. There were exercise classes, and then on the off week she had like a bunch of videos that we would watch. So that was the pace of that was really nice. So you just go to school every other week.
Interesting. So it was but it was physically in class, but it was just the exercise classes. Yeah. By the way, I know that course is a good course. That is it Katrina? I don't know her well, but I know that she always gets very good reviews for that course.
Yeah.
But that's an option. But then, you know, it kind of makes me feel a little bit sad because then I'm just teaching an exercise class, and you probably don't even need me to teach it. It could just be a grad student.
Yeah, but you know, when the teacher teaches the exercise class, it's a better exercise class.
That's probably
because he's teaching you what he wants you to know, not just what the teaching assistants thinks the teacher wants you to know.
Yes, that's right. That is, I'm sure that's exactly it. I'm the one writing the exam, right?
Yeah.
So that's always important. Yeah, that's right. So I mean, but it still feels a little bit sad. I'm really thinking about maybe changing. So I'm teaching a new course this semester, and I'm really excited about it. It's topics, I call it topics in public economics, but it's really kind of the margin between normative economics and almost like ethics, like almost like moral philosophy, really. And it's going to be based on like readings and like class discussion. And I just think it's like it's going to be a course that is going to be, you know, the actual in-class part of it is going to be more important. It's something that I wouldn't be able to record on a video. So maybe that will be a way forward for me to teach that then, and I can maybe let somebody else teach this or something. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to do. I mean, I'd be sad if I was only teaching exercise courses, but maybe I could just make really nice videos. I don't know. We'll see. Okay, so let's let's talk a little bit about problem set 2.17. So let me first just show you the problem here in the textbook. Oops, this one. Let me close this, or else I'm just going to keep accidentally clicking on it. Okay, so it's a bit fuzzy. Sorry about that, but it's going to be a diamond model. Okay, so it's again overlapping generations. We're going to make G 0 so that we don't have any sort of productivity growth. The economy is just the same productivity forever, which also you will recall means that in the steady state, there's no growth in output per capita. Production's Cobb-Douglas, as we've been assuming. Utilities logarithmic, as we've been consuming, and we're going to, as we've been assuming, and we're gonna look at two different types of possible Social Security. Okay, we're gonna look at pay-as-you-go, pay-go, it's sometimes called by people in the field, and then fully funded Social Security. So I don't know if you're following this debate, but over the course of time, I would say that many countries, including Denmark, also the United States, they have moved more or less from pay-as-you-go to, or they haven't moved completely, but they use pay-as-you-go less and they use fully funded more. And then just to remind you what that is, pay-as-you-go is like the people who are currently young, they pay taxes, and then those taxes are transferred as payments to older people directly. So it's like the young people are paying, and then the older people are consuming, if you like. So the young people produce, the old people consume, and then the idea is that when the young people get older, there will be a new generation of young people to produce, and then those people will consume. Okay, so that's the kind of the old model. The newer model is this fully funded idea, and that's the idea where maybe there's forced savings. So like, for instance, for me, there's part of my paycheck is a pension payment, which is taken and invested somewhere by my pension. And then when I get older, I'll get that money back. But then, you know, the amount that I get back depends on the amount that I put in, right? So it's not like a benefit that's out there for me that's going to be paid for by young taxpayers. Rather, it's just my investments. It's what distinguishes it from a regular investment is that it's a forced investment, basically. But that's it. Otherwise, it's just a lump of capital that is accumulating, you know, interest over time, and then I'll get paid back when I'm older, based on the amount that I paid in. Okay, so what we want to ask in this question is, what are the implications in an overlapping generations model of these two different types of pension scheme? Are they the same? Are they different? You know, what happens basically? Okay, so let's look at this question here. So it says, let's look at exactly how we're going to specify this pay-as-you-go. We're going to suppose that the government is going to tax each young individual a certain amount, T. So it's a per person T tax. And then they're going to use that to pay the old people, okay? But as we discussed in the lecture on the diamond model, on the overlapping generations model, since there's more young people than there are old people, each old person doesn't only get T, each young person is paying T, but each older person gets T times 1 plus N, because there's 1 plus N young people for each old person, okay? The population is growing over time. Okay, so basically, most of our calculations are going to be here in part I, which says, how does this affect equation 2.61, which gives little kt plus 1 as a function of kt? Okay, so now let me flip, and then down here, we're going to do the same thing for the fully funded version. Okay, so let me flip now here, and I've got my little cheat sheet that I prepared before, so I'm going to put it here so I don't get confused, but I'm going to walk you through the calculations here. Okay, so the first thing I want to say about the problem is they want you to compare your answer to 2.6 in the textbook or something. So let me write out what that is first. So this is problem 2.17. And in the textbook, we get this equation, little kt plus 1 is equal to 1 divided by 1 plus n times 1 divided by 2 plus rho times 1 minus alpha times little k t to the power alpha. Okay, so this is equation 2.60, I think, in the textbook. All right, so we want to rederive this equation, but under this new taxation scheme. In this version, there was no taxes. There was not, the government wasn't doing anything. So what is this going to look like when there are taxes? Okay, so unfortunately, this means we have to sort of resolve the consumer's problem, because now if we think back into this model, you'll recall that kt plus 1, without the little there, so the capital stock at time t plus 1 is the savings at time t of each young person times the number of young people we have. Okay, so this LT here, this is exogenous, but the ST, unfortunately, is a choice that's made by the people in the model. So we actually have to solve again and figure out what people choose to save given the new structure of taxation. Okay, so that's going to take a little bit of calculation. So let's go through that. Okay. So the way we're going to do that is first we're going to talk about the budget constraint, which is going to look a little bit different now. The utility function is the same, but the budget constraint is different. Okay. So what's the budget constraint in our new model, with our taxes? Well, when people are young, their consumption is going to equal their wage times productivity. I'm being a little bit loose here. Productivity we're assuming is going to be constant, so that's just going to be A. I guess the wage should technically have a time subscript, but just to keep the notation clean, I'm going to leave it off for now. Minus savings. Okay, so what's consumption? It's how much I made minus how much I saved. Okay. Minus now something else, taxes, right? The government is taxing, right? And what is my consumption when I'm old going to look like? Well, when I'm old, consumption is going to be the rate of return I got on my savings. Okay. But now I'm going to get something else. Now the government is actually taxing the young people in this generation. So I'm going to get the number of young people per old person, 1 plus n, times t, the amount the government is taxing. Okay, so this is that pay-as-you-go structure. They're taxing the young people, and then they're paying the old people 1 plus n. This is, again, that tax that's only available to the government. Only the government can actually use this technology, because typically you can't support any transfer from the young to the old, since the old will be dead in the future. They can't pay back the young in the next period. Okay. Now let's combine these two things to get a single budget constraint. What we're going to do is we're going to substitute out savings. Okay, so we're going to just get a budget constraint, one single budget constraint that that's going to have both consumption in period when in the young period and in the old period here. Okay, so let's just go ahead and do that. We're going to get C2. I've written down here. I'm just copying a little bit what I've written on my cheat sheet. Okay, here we have a savings. Here we have a savings. So basically we're going to switch the S and the C1, add S to both sides and subtract C1 from both sides. And we get this, C1 minus T. Okay, so that's that S. And now let's add 1 plus N times T. Okay, so now here is our budget constraint. Now we're going to maximize utility subject to this budget constraint. So what is our utility? Well, in the diamond model chapter, we assumed that utility could be written as log C1 plus 1 over 1 plus rho log of C2. Okay. We have log utility, and consumption is all that matters in this model. All right, so let's make our lives easier. Let's just substitute out C2. Okay, right now we have to maximize over both C1 and C2. We could do this using the method of Lagrangian multipliers, as I mentioned, but often it's just easier to substitute directly using the budget constraint. So let's do that, and then we can just optimize only over C1 rather than over both C1 and C2. Okay, so let's rewrite this utility function as log C1 plus 1 over 1 plus rho log of, and now I'm just going to substitute in this whole thing up here. Okay, 1 plus R times AW minus C1 minus T plus 1 plus NT, close brackets. Okay, so this is nice now because I only have C1. There's only one thing that the consumer here has to choose. The only thing is C1. Okay, so how do we solve for C1? The optimal C1 for the consumer, or the agent, I guess you'd call them here. So we're going to take the derivative of the utility function with respect to C1. Here we're going to get 1 over C1 plus 1 over 1 plus rho and then 1 over this whole thing, which I'm not going to write out at the moment. So, taking the derivative of log, 1 over this whole expression. Let's see here. Inside we have a negative 1 plus r. Negative 1 plus r. Oops. What happened? Okay. So we're going to set this equal to 0. Okay. And now I'm going to just move this side, which is negative, to this side. So I'm going to add this side to both sides. So I'll get 1 divided by C1 is equal to 1 plus r divided by 1 plus rho. And here I'm going to write this out because I have to. 1 plus r times a w minus C1 minus t, close brackets, plus 1 plus n times t. Okie doke. So now we have to solve for C1, and that will be our optimal level of C1. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply both sides by C1. So I'm going to take the C1 and put it over here. Then I'm going to take this complicated looking thing down here. I'm going to put it over here. Okay. So writing that out, it's going to be C1 is equal to, I should be careful here, 1 plus r times 1 plus p divided by 1 plus rho, I should say. C1 is equal to 1 plus r times aw minus C1 minus t plus 1 plus n times t. Okay, and now you can see we're getting close to solving for C1. This is looking more like something we can solve. Okay. So just following my note here so I don't make any mistakes. So let's take this term here and put it on the other side. We're going to get 1 plus r. Excuse me. 1 second, my son quick. Hey, yeah, what's up? You know what I'm gonna ask? Yeah, play date? Yeah. Okay, sure, sounds fine. Either are fine. Okay, bye. Okay, bye. You can call him and ask. Sorry about that. Okay, anyway, so it's 1 plus r divided by 1 plus rho. And then here we're going to add 1 plus rho. The whole thing times C1. And now just what's left over on the other side, 1 plus rho, 1 plus r times aw minus t plus 1 plus n times t. Okay. Now all we have to do is just divide both sides by this thing. So let's simplify this expression a little bit. Okay. So let's take that 1 plus r, put it on the outside. And then we're going to have here 1 divided by 1 plus rho plus 1. Okay, so that's going to be, if you solve that, it's going to be 2 plus rho divided by 1 plus rho. 1 divided by 1 plus rho plus 1. It's going to be 1 divided by 1 plus rho plus 1 plus rho divided by 1 plus rho. So 2 plus rho divided by 1 plus rho times C1 times the same thing. Okay, so finally, we can get our optimal C1. Okay, that's the final step here. It's equal to 1 plus rho divided by 2 plus rho. Okay, just multiplying by the inverse of this thing on both sides. And then in here, we're going to divide both sides by 1 plus r. So for this first term, that's going to cancel out. So we're going to get aw minus t plus 1 plus n divided by 1 plus r times t. Okay. Now let's simplify that one more step. We have an a times w, and then here we have 1 plus n divided by 1 plus r minus 1. So that's going to be plus 1 plus n minus 1 plus r divided by 1 plus r times t. Or in other words, let me just simplify this one more step here. It's too many steps. So 1 plus n minus 1 plus r, that's 1 minus 1, right? So it's going to be n minus r divided by 1 plus r times t. Okay. So now we've resolved the individual's problem. And remember, what's the whole goal here? We want to figure out how much this person is saving. Why do we want to figure out how much this person is saving? Well, come back up here. The capital at time t plus 1 is equal to savings times the labor supply. Labor supply is exogenous. Okay, so so this whole point of this whole thing has basically just been to solve for savings. Okay, and if we look at this part of the budget constraint here, you can see that there's this relationship between AW, which is something exogenous from the point of view of the consumer, T, which is something that's exogenous from the point of view of the consumer, and then S and C. So now that we know what the optimal C is, optimal C1 is, we can solve directly for the S. Okay, and once we got the S, then we can solve for the KT plus 1, and then we can get the answer to the question about how does our new little KT plus 1 look compared to the old one. Okay. So I think I have to start a new page here. How do I do that? Okay, so let's get our savings. Savings is equal to AW minus C1 minus T. Again, makes sense, right? Here's the total income minus what I consume, minus the taxes. What's left over is what I save. Okay. We're going to plug in our optimal C1. So now this is going to be this expression here, minus 1 plus rho divided by 2 plus rho times AW plus n minus r 1 plus RT minus T. Okay. So now it's basically just simplifying, but we can do that. Notice here we have an AW, here we have an AW, here we have a T, here we have a T. So basically we just have to kind of rewrite these things. Okay. So if we have 1 minus, let's write it out. So we're going to have 1 minus 1 plus rho divided by 2 plus rho. That's going to be the multiplier on A times W. Okay, so another way to write that is 2 plus rho minus 1 plus rho divided by 2 plus rho times AW. Here we're going to have, these are both negative, if I'm not wrong. So that means that here we're going to have, let's see here, minus n minus r divided by 1 plus r plus 1 times t. Okay. And I'm going to do that same trick actually. So I'm going to write 1 plus r divided by 1 plus r instead of 1 times t. All right, so 2 minus 1, that's 1. Rho plus rho is 2. Oh no, this is in parentheses. So let's see here. 2 minus 1 is 1. Rho minus rho is 0. So that means we are going to get 1 divided by 2 plus rho times AW That's what I got on my cheat sheet too, so that's good. Minus, let's look here, we have n minus r plus 1 plus r. So the r's cancel out, so we're going to have 1 plus n divided by 1 plus r. 1 plus n divided by 1 plus r times t. Okay. All right, so that's it. That gives us our savings. Now, remember that big K t plus 1, capital at time t plus 1, is equal to savings at time t times L at time t. Okay, and again, why is it this way in this model? It's because the way this model works is the young people save. They lend their saved capital to firms in the next period. Then they get their capital back and then they consume it, right? So the old people always consume all of their capital in the second period when they're older. So the only capital in the economy is actually what is saved by the young. That's different, right, than in other models we've looked at, but that is the way it works in this model. So again, it's the savings of the young. That's the only capital in the economy. Okay. When they get old, they consume all of their capital. Okay, so here's savings. So let's plug that in. So we're going to get big K t plus 1 is equal to 1 divided by 2 plus rho A times W times LT. I guess that should probably have a T as well. And then minus 1 plus N divided by 1 plus R T times LT. Okay. All right, so now what we need to do is change this big K into a little k. Okay, so we're going to divide big K t plus 1. We're going to divide it by AT plus 1 LT plus 1. So we're going to divide both sides by AT plus 1 LT plus 1. But recall that we've assumed that A is constant. There's no growth in technology, so I don't have to actually divide by AT plus 1. I can just divide by A. It's constant over time. Okay, but I do have to divide by LT plus 1. Let's do the same over here. A, LT plus 1. And the same here. A, LT plus 1. Okay. So here we have little k, t plus 1 is equal to 1 divided by 2 plus rho. Cross out the a's. We're going to get wage at time t. And then LT divided by LT plus 1, that's actually 1 divided by 1 plus n, right? That's the growth rate of labor. So if I look at the ratio of LT to LT plus 1, well, it's just 1 divided by 1 plus n. That's exogenous, and it's something that is given to us in the problem. Here we're going to have, again, a 1 divided by 1 plus n. That goes away because here we have a 1 plus n up here. This gives us a 1 divided by 1 plus n. We just have 1 divided by 1 plus r times t divided by a. Okay. So this is almost it, right? All we're missing is the wage, but that doesn't actually change. That's the same as it was in the problem or in the text. So you'll recall, because of the Cobb-Douglas production function, the wage looks like this. Well, first, this doesn't depend on Cobb-Douglas, but this is a general form of the wage, minus little k times f prime of little k. So we derive that in the slides. I'm not going to rederive it here. If you plug in the Cobb-Douglas production function, here we have little k to the power alpha minus little k times alpha little k to the power alpha minus 1. Combine those two things and you get 1 minus alpha times little k to the power alpha. Okay, so that's the wage level. So let's plug that in. 1, I'm going to try to put this in the same order as it was on the other one. 1 divided by 2 plus rho times 1 minus alpha times little k to the power alpha minus 1 over 1 plus r t divided by a. Okay, and that's it. So that's the answer to that first little question. So that took a lot of work to get to. Luckily, that's pretty much all the work we're going to have to do for the rest of this problem. Okay, so let's look at this equation here. Little kt plus 1 is equal to this thing. I'm going to scroll up now to the top. Look at this. It looks very similar, right? It's almost the same. The only difference here between the sort of no tax version, the market decentralized version in the textbook, and this pay-as-you-go tax system is that we have an additional term. Okay, this part here is actually exactly the same as the market version. It's identical. But now we're subtracting off this term that has to do with the taxes. Okay, so basically, you can imagine we're in sort of our steady state, and then suddenly this tax is imposed. What's going to happen? It's going to mean that we're going to get less sort of capital in the next period. Okay, so basically the government is removing some of the capital. And if you think about it, what's really kind of happening is that if I'm a young person, I know I don't have to save as much. And the reason why is because I know that when I'm older, the government's going to be paying me something. Okay, so I don't really need to worry as much about savings as I did before. I'm not going to save as much as I was planning on saving. Okay, so based on that argument, so this is the answer to the first one. Let's actually look at the problem in the textbook. So this answers I. How does this affect the evolution of capital? I think I wrote 2.60, but I should have written 2.61. So that's how. Basically, there's going to be a new term in the equation. It's going to have to do with taxes, and it's going to be negative. Okay. Now, the second one, how, if at all, does this change the effect, or how does this affect the balanced growth path? Well, I think the best way to think about this is to imagine that we're on the balanced growth path, and then this tax is assessed. Basically, it's going to mean that, mathematically, what it says is that now this side here is going to it's going to go down. And then how are we going to make it so that this thing doesn't change? We have to kind of reduce, we're going to have to kind of reduce our steady state level of capital to get this to be steeper. Like, suppose we start here with this steady state level of capital, this k to the power alpha is going to be flatter. Now we're subtracting something off here in order to sort of induce the left-hand side to equal the right-hand side. That's going to happen at sort of a steeper part of this production function. I mean, you can think of this, the right way to think about it, you can think of this as a shift, right? This is like a shift in the production function. So, yeah, should be careful here. So if this is our original steady state, it's kind of like we shifted the production function down a little bit. So then that would be our new steady state. So I think that's the right way to think about it. Anyway, the steady state is going to go here to the left. Okay, so it's going to reduce our steady state level of capital. I think that's right. You want to think about this as a shift in this function. Yeah. Okay, so it's going to reduce the balanced growth path value of little k. And then the intuition here is you don't have to save as much. There doesn't have to be as much capital because the government's promising to give you some capital. They're going to tax off the next generation. We don't need as much capital in the economy. Okay. Next one, if the economy is initially on a balanced growth path that's dynamically efficient, how does a marginal increase in T affect the welfare of current and future generations? Okay, so if we're on a balanced growth path that's dynamically efficient, it basically means that nothing can be done that's not going to harm anybody, right? So any change is going to be worse for either the old or the young. There's no room the government has for a policy that's going to make everyone better off. The government might be able to harm the young people or maybe harm the old generation today in order to help the young generation tomorrow, but there's no sort of Pareto efficient where everybody's better off change that can happen here. So any policy the government takes is just going to be bad, okay? If the balanced growth path is dynamically efficient. Now, the second one is, what happens if the initial balanced growth path is dynamically inefficient? So you'll recall that the problem when the balanced growth path is dynamically inefficient is that people are saving too much. Okay, so we can actually make everybody better off if we can somehow force the young to save a little bit less. All right, well, that's actually the situation where this sort of thing can help, right? So, I mean, what's the ultimate effect of this pay-as-you-go system? It's to cause people to save less. Why? Because they know the government's going to support them in the next period when they're old by taxing the young, so they don't have to save as much. All right, so it actually does induce people to save less. So if you are in a dynamically inefficient economy, a pay-as-you-go Social Security pension system can actually have the effect that you want to sort of make every generation better off. Okay. Now, by the way, stop me if you guys have any questions about this. Now let's talk about the fully funded Social Security system. So now this is the different kind of pension. This is the one that we see more often today. Okay, so how is it different? Well, let's suppose that the government taxes each young person in amount T and then uses the proceeds to purchase capital. Individuals born at T, therefore, receive 1 plus R T when they're old. Okay, so it's going to be very similar, except for now, instead of individuals receiving 1 plus N, they're going to receive 1 plus R times T. Okay, so let's actually look at what that does to our equations. Let's look up here at the budget constraint. Okay, you can just start here. So now, instead of having C2 where we have a 1 plus N here, we're going to have a 1 plus R here, right? So in the fully funded version, we have a 1 plus R rather than a 1 plus N. Okay, so we can kind of figure out the effect of this by just kind of going through this whole problem. And every time we see an R, an N, just replace it with an R up to a point. In particular, let's look at the savings decision. That's where we really need to look at it. Yeah, right here. So what happens if we replace this 1 plus N with 1 plus R, you can see that the savings of the young people are just going to be what they would have saved in the no tax version of the economy minus the amount of taxes. Okay, and that totally makes sense if you think about it, because what's the rate of return these people are getting on their savings when there's no taxes? It's 1 plus R, right? So whatever they want to save, whatever their efficient level of savings is, if the government sort of forces them to save T, an amount T, well, then they're just going to subtract that off of their own savings, right? There's no difference really between the government forcing you to save and you choosing to save. So the government forces you to save, 100 kroner a month. You just take whatever you were already planning on saving and reduce it by 100 kroner per month. And that's all that happens, okay? So since that's true, let's see here. Where would we see it? So now here, this 1 plus N is just 1 plus R. I'll look here at my cheat sheet. All right. So let's just write one step here. So now this is up red in red here. So you can see it's 2.17 part B. Okay, so using my argument here, KT plus 1 is equal to STLT, right? The capital, this is it, right? This is what I wasn't thinking about. Okay, so what now is our capital level going into the next period? Well, it's no longer just the private savings, right? The government is actually accumulating capital. Okay, so now it's the private savings plus the government's forced savings as well. Okay. Now, based on our discussion up here, we're just going to have 1 minus 2 plus rho AW minus T. Remember 1 plus N, and now this is 1 plus R. Okay, so we're going to have A times W. Oh, I already lost it. What was it? 1 divided by 2 plus rho times LT minus T times LT. I wrote this in a confusing way. Minus T, this whole thing, times LT, plus T times LT. All right. Next step, well, you can already see where this is going. It's A times W, 1 divided by 2 plus rho, times LT, minus TLT, plus TLT. These two things cancel. So we end up with just A times W, 1 divided by 2 plus rho, times LT. Okay, and this is exactly the same as what we would have got in the market equilibrium with no taxes at all. Okay, so without going through the extra steps, we could actually turn this into little k and everything. It's going to look exactly like 2.6. It's going to look exactly as it would look in the economy where there's no taxes at all. Okay, so what do we learn? Well, let's answer the question. Okay, so we could actually just, I think we could just reason that now we're going to get back to exactly the same as what we saw in the textbook, whatever it is, equation 2.61. It's not going to look any different in this fully funded Social Security model. And then how, if at all, does this change the balanced growth path value of K? It doesn't. It's exactly the same. Nothing changes, okay? So, so that's kind of it for that problem. But, it's one of those problems, like I said, where I think there's really something interesting that it's saying. It's saying that when you have a fully funded Social Security system, like the one we have, say, in Denmark that applies to me, however much you force me to save, I'm just going to reduce how much I would have saved by that much, okay? When you have a pay-as-you-go Social Security system, that's not true because the government isn't raising capital. It's just making a transfer from young people to old people, okay? And, through the lens of the model, what's different is that the rate of return is different, basically. So that's, the government takes advantage of this social rate of return from the growing population. So that's all I have to say about the problem. I think there's one other thing that's kind of interesting to say. I saw a talk not very long ago, maybe a year or two ago, where somebody actually had looked at Danish data and they had looked at changes in the pension system, because over time, actually, Denmark, as in many other countries, has moved from this pay-as-you-go, which is like, you can think about this as like maybe guaranteed benefits for like factory workers or something like that, to fully funded. Okay, so you can actually see like when people shift from one to the other. So the study I saw was looking to see if people actually did reduce their private savings once they moved on to this fully funded Social Security. And they had some really interesting results. So it turns out that the answer is yes, they do, but they don't reduce it one-to-one, right? So if the government sort of forces you to save 7,000 kroner a month, then you reduce it by 4,000 kroner a month, your private savings or something like that. And it turns out that it was like correlated with education, and then in particular with education in finance and economics subjects. So people had seen this model, and then they had literally thought about this when the government changed the system, and then they actually reacted as our agents in these models react. So yeah, which I got a kick out of. So that's all I got. Any questions about that? I'll post the solution online.
So when my group solved this, we definitely just did some hand wavy stuff because this was too much math to do.
It's a lot of math. It's a lot of math.
We made some reasoning for it, but you know.
Did you get the same answer out of curiosity?
Yeah, in part B, we said that people aren't better off with anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's right. And you can see that I kind of wave my hands quite a bit on part B as well.
And then we said that the growth path would get lower because of the tax.
Yeah.
Return would be reduced.
Yeah, that's right. So that's all good. So, you know, if you're worrying about like thinking about like the exam, so I think you saw I've got a mock exam up. I don't think I posted the solutions yet, but you know, I'm not going to ask you to do like long calculations without any guide. Like, you know, this problem really, it's like it asked you something simple. How does the evolution of capital, little kt plus 1, how does that change when we induce this tax? And you can see that there's just a massive amount of calculation that goes into that. If I were to, I might ask you to do some calculations related to this on the exam. I would probably walk you through it a little bit more. You know what I mean? So I would say something like, you know, how does it change the budget constraint, right? And then maybe I'd ask you to figure that out or something. And, or maybe I'd give you the utility function and say, you know, solve for the optimal level of consumption given this utility function. But I wouldn't give you such a long, unguided calculation to do. So, yeah. Any other questions? Do we have class next week? Actually, it's Easter, but CBS doesn't.
No, it's off.
It's off. Okay. Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, then I'll wish you guys good luck on your exam on Friday, is it? And happy Easter.
In 1 week, though, you're gonna post an assignment. Assignment number 3.
Okay. I'm sure I'll be getting an email from the department secretary.
Yeah.
Asking me to do that soon. All right, guys. All right. Talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.